Welcome to the Hindu editorial discussion. My name is Ryan Pinto, and I'm going to discuss with you some important topics of November 27th and 28th of the editorials of the Hindu. The first topic that we are going to discuss is on Cyclone Nivar. Cyclone Nivar had come in the eastern coast of India, especially affecting the states like Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, etc. More effect on Tamil Nadu, not much on Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. Now, Cyclone Nivar was to be expected as one of a very disastrous cyclone, but because of the steps taken by the government, a lot of the disaster has we have been able to at least stop the effects of the disaster. We can't stop the disaster. We know cyclones are a natural hazard, and when hazard leads to death and destruction of property, becomes a disaster. Cyclones are very low depressions in the center and high pressure at the side. So this is how the cyclones normally happen. Remember, low pressure at the center and high pressure at the sides. So let's talk about the editorial and remember about Cyclone Nivar and the destruction it has caused. The governments can handle cyclones better by investing in town planning and infrastructure. So here our more focus is on town planning and infrastructure. This is going to be a part of GS paper 1 disaster management. So cyclones can be handled by town planning and infrastructure. Cyclone Nivar raised fears of another epic disaster for millions of coastal residents in the south. But its passage overland near Puducherry early on November 26 was less destructive than anticipated. As I already told you, there was a lot of anticipation or expectation of a lot of issues or lot of problems because of these cyclones, but luckily we have been able to cross this. Although property and agriculture have suffered considerable damages from the fierce winds and massive volume of rain, citizens and the government were fearful of a deluge that could be a repeat of 2015 flood. In 2015, there was a flood in Chennai, and it killed many people and a lot of damage was made on the property. The same things were predicted for Cyclone Nivar. Luckily, we were able to go through this. There was also a welcome of emphasis on periodic alerts. So one of the reasons why Cyclone Nivar we were able to overcome it is because of the periodic alerts and warnings. The IMD has been getting better at forecasting slow-moving linear tropical cyclones in Bay of Bengal, and multiple satellites now provide cyclone data. So IMD has better equipments now, they have better technology, they have been now becoming more precise, and their predictions have been better. But now there is some other things that we need to focus on, that is town planning and infrastructure. The deployment of 24 NDRF teams and disaster management equipments along the coast reassured civic agencies. So NDRF was there, disaster management equipments were there, IMD has been better forecasting the cyclones. So these are the positive things. What must worry the two major parties, that is the AIA-DMK and the DMK? Periodic papering of the cracks does not offer a sustainable solution to Chennai's evident civic decay. So whether it be DMK or the AIA-DMK, the Chennai has faced a lot of flood issues and the cyclone problems. Okay, and these two parties have, whenever they are in the power, they only do some you can say last minute work, or you can say some superficial work to cover the issues of floods and the cyclone. No concrete work has been done so that long term we can solve this issue. There is extensive documentation on the loss of its floodplains, lakes, and peri-urban wetlands to encroachment, a key factor that is exacerbating the monsoon flooding. So, one of the biggest reasons for the flooding in Chennai is encroachments of the floodplains, lake, and the wetland areas. The land grab is made possible by benign indulgence of successive governments. Encroachments are done, land grab is done, and the governments are not taking any stand or position or not doing anything. Governments have not shown the rigor to collect and publish data on annual flooding patterns and measure the peaks in the neglected rivers and canals to plan remedies. So the government had to collect and publish data, which it is not doing. Appalling indifference to land use norms has spawned an amorphous housing sector characterized by inflated speculative prices but no foundation of civic infrastructure. The housing sector is booming, the prices are very high, but what is the government doing? Where is the planning? Where is the preventive measures for the cyclones or the floods? That is not happening. So the government needs to take up these issues and do something regarding the floods situation and the cyclones in Tamil Nadu. To keep Tamil Nadu competitive, governments and local bodies should hardwire urban planning and invest heavily for a future of frequent disruptive weather. So our focus was on town planning and infrastructure. Focus was on encroachment and land grabs. No proper information available. So what points we can retrieve from this is town planning, infrastructure, and land grabs, and data and information being available, government's intervention needed, and also you must understand that is land use norms to be made stringent, that so that our wetlands and the forests and these areas are not given easily to the land mafia or the rich people, and then they spoil the whole environment ecology, which leads to disasters. So this was the first editorial. The second editorial, we speak about the Ayurvedic surgery. Okay, so Ayurveda is one of an Upaveda. Okay, it is like related with the Rig Veda, and Ayurveda plays a very, very important role. Okay, and India is known for its traditional medicines. You must have heard about the Ayush ministry, which we are going to speak about. And Ayurveda is very, very important for the traditional medicines, for the herbs that we have. It uses the environment, it uses our ecology and biodiversity to solve our health issues. India is blessed with traditional knowledge of medicines. And in front of you have Sushrut. Sushrut is important for surgery in India. He is the, you can say, inventor of surgery. Charak is for medicines, Sushrut is for surgery. You must remember this. The photo is in front of you. A clear reading of the Ayurveda surgery move. Let's see, in today's context where we have less hospitals, less doctors, can Ayurvedic doctors help in surgery? India needs its Ayurveda graduates, including surgeons, to improve the common man's access to decent healthcare. We know the healthcare investment by the government or the private investors is very low, and we need more to be done. And in this time of COVID-19, there is a lot of you can say need for these you can say medicines or the graduates. Ayurvedic graduates are needed a lot. In 2014, while speaking at the inauguration of a Mumbai hospital in Mumbai, Prime Minister Narendra Modi extolled the virtues of India's medical heritage. Prime Minister and the current government is a votary of uh, the Indian medicines, the traditional medicines like homeopathy and Siddha, Ayurveda, etc. We know Sushrut and his surgical dexterity at a time when the world had not yet woken up to the art and the science of surgery. There are detailed descriptions in the Sushrut Samhita. So remember Sushrut, I had shown you the picture. The ancient Sanskrit text on medicine and surgery of procedures such as rhinoplasty, where the nose is reconstructed with the tissue from the cheek. So this was all there in our traditional literature. It was thousands of years later that modern plastic surgeons described this procedure, which we had earlier in our books. Response to notification. Now, why we are studying about all this? Last week on November 20, a Gazette of India notification by the Central Council of Indian Medicine, a statutory body under the Indian Medicine Central Council Act. So, remember Central Council of India Medicine, CCIM, they had removed a gazette identifying surgical procedures which was done can be performed by postgraduate Ayurvedic doctors in Shalya surgery. So the CCIM, which is a statutory body, identified surgical procedures which was done by Ayurvedic doctors. Now this was not liked by the Indian Medical Association, has written a curious self-flagellating letter to the Prime Minister's. Allopathic surgeon colleagues are outraged. Social media and WhatsApp group are abuzz with alarming responses. Some have portrayed doomsday scenario where our children will be operated by half-baked Ayurvedic doctors in the future. This is what the IMA says, that the doctors are not proper. The Ayurvedic surgeons which were there or which are there are not capable of having this surgery done. So this is the charge of the IMA. And we see the IMA is saying that when India is having a rich tradition of surgery, example Sushrut. After 1947, what happened? What happened to the Ayurveda? Why this Ayurvedic surgery was not able to grow? After the independence, 1947, the Indian state was faced with difficult task of accommodating both ascendant modern medicine brought in by the British and India's traditional systems. So we had two systems, that is one by the British, the allopathy, and the Indian traditional system of medicine, notably Ayurveda. There were two options. One was to take the best from all the systems. So there were two options. First was to take the best from all the systems, and second was integrate them into cohesive science. This was possible but not easy, as the systems have certain incompatible differences of approach. Okay, so to take the best from both and integrate them, that was one of the strategy which was thought. There actually existed integrated courses just after our independence, wherein both Ayurveda and modern medicine were taught to students. But these withered away, partly due to opposition from the purists in Ayurveda who were outraged by the dilution of their science. So it was actually the Ayurveda students or graduates who were not happy of mixing the two. It was necessary of practical career compulsion to teach the basics of modern medicine to these graduates. They had to survive in the medical market. Now, because of all this, what happened is now the Ayurvedic people, they were not happy with the integration. So it was considered different and it was not integrated with the modern science. But now what is happening? They have to study about the modern science if they have to work in the market. They had to survive in the medical market, which by the time was the dominant form of healthcare in India. Most Ayurvedic graduates entered general practice. More importantly, several of them went on to work in rural areas and underserved areas. Some set up nursing homes. In rural Maharashtra, several nursing homes were run by integrated graduates. Example, in Chiplun in the Konkan, for instance, only nursing homes offering emergency obstetric surgical services were run by non-allopathic graduates. So slowly these Ayurvedic graduates, they learned modern basic science and they went to the rural areas and they started working. So see how important these Ayurvedic doctors are, or these non-allopathy doctors are, where they started offering emergency obstetric and surgical services slowly and steadily, because there is a lot of need for these surgeons or doctors. Now, what is the issue? Ayurvedic graduates experienced an identity crisis. Many of them had joined the course not for the love of Ayurveda, but to get a degree with the honorific doctor, which gave them upward mobility, social status, and even value in the marriage market. So now these are the issues, which is the identity crisis. They became resident doctors, intensive care duty doctors, and operation theatre assistant surgeons. So remember, they became resident doctors, intensive care unit doctors, and assistant surgeons. They picked up skills, were diligent, and unlike their counterparts in MBBS, were not constantly distracted by thoughts of post graduation. So they learned the skills. They were diligent. They had identity crisis, but they were smart. They learned the skills, and they were not always focusing on the post graduation, which normally our allopathic doctors focus on: entrance exam and post graduation. So they worked well. They served the people well. Example, in Mumbai, there is an instance of a homeopathic graduate manning and training others on the extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO. So just imagine a homeopathic graduate, he is manning and training for the ECMO, a complex heart-lung machine in the largest unit for critically COVID-19 patients. In Maharashtra, the 108 emergency response ambulance is manned by non-MBBS doctors. So in Maharashtra, you will see various examples of non-allopathic playing a major role in our health system. During COVID-19, a large number of the quarantine centers were manned by these doctors. Incidentally, they work for less pay. Now to the idea of Ayurvedic surgeons. So we saw what is the importance of Ayurveda in our country, what happened after 1947, and what is the situation of the Ayurvedic doctors which are there. In an effort to develop postgraduate programs, Ayurveda medical colleges developed one in Shalya or surgery. This is awkward, as unlike the vast pharmacopoeia, there is really nothing called as Ayurvedic surgery. So Ayurveda Medical College developed in one program, postgraduate program in surgery, but there is nothing called as Ayurvedic surgery. Most Ayurvedic medical colleges run hospitals. In some areas, theirs is the only viable and equipped hospital. This is the situation of health in India. The Mumbai Municipal Corporation has appointed Ayurvedic surgeons to many of their hospitals. The controversial notification, now coming to the current, issued on November 20, called Indian Medicine Central Council Postgraduate Ayurveda Education Amendment Rules 2020 by the CCIM, authorizes an MS Ayurveda Shalya Tantra or General Surgery postgraduate degree holder on completion of his course to perform 58 surgical procedures. Now this is the issue. The Indian Medicine Central Council Act has been amended, and it allows the postgraduate in Ayurveda, especially in the Shalya Tantra, that is surgery, to do 58 surgical procedures. This is not liked by the IMA, Indian Medical Association. Some of the procedures in the list are rather complicated. A modern surgical postgraduate to perform a removal of gallbladder called cholecystectomy independently unless they have assisted or been taken through at least 100 odd procedures. For Ayurvedic surgeons to do it is an obvious overkill. It has been listed as Pita Shamari Nirharan Chedan, that is to remove the gallbladder. It's very difficult. There need to be at least 100 odd procedures, and Ayurvedic surgeon doing it is a bit difficult, but it is allowed for them. That is what the IMA is saying. Ayurveda graduates include surgeons are a large workforce in search of an identity. India needs them. India has a lot of Ayurvedic graduates and they need them. If they are creatively and properly trained, they can play important roles in our healthcare system. Ayush or Ayurveda, yoga and naturopathy, Unani, Siddha and homeopathy. When you say Ayush, remember this. It is Ayurveda, yoga, naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, homeopathy is a priority area for this present government. The revival of Indian medicine fits well into certain narrative. Be that as it may, the IMA in its opposition to such moves needs to be precise and constructive. The IMA just can't say that it is our duty and only we are capable. It needs to be very precise and constructive that what are the alternatives you have, because India needs these surgeons and doctors. Currently, its response is like chesting thumping of a guild of insecure professionals. Looks like they are a guild or they are a group of insecure professionals. Serious discussions about utilizing India's large workforce of non-MBBS doctors to improve access to decent health for our ordinary citizen, then it is well worth our time. There need to be serious discussions rather than just shouting and making noise and saying that Ayurvedic doctors are not good. So a very good editorial. It starts with the history of Ayurveda. What is the importance of Ayurveda? Then we saw after 1947 what happens, why Ayurveda was left behind. Then we saw the state of the Ayurvedic doctors, what they have been doing till now, where they are. They have entered the rural areas, etc. And they are manning the vacuum which is there, that is the less of doctors. Then we saw Ayurvedic surgery, Sushrut and what are the things. Then we saw the current affairs, that is the Shalya Tantra, that is the surgery which is being allowed for the MS students in Ayurveda, and that is not liked by the IMA, but we need them because of less doctors and less hospitals, and we need to constructively think about it. Very nice article. You can use it in GS paper 2 health and make proper notes and answer. Next is another important issue on social media. India has recently banned some more apps by the Chinese. Will this banning work? Should India be banning such things? That is what we are going to discuss. So it can be a part of international relations also and science and technology. India must stick to the rules-based approach in regulating the internet. India's decision on Tuesday to block another 43 Chinese mobile applications hardly comes as a surprise. Since June, following escalation of tensions with China at the border, India has blocked over 250 Chinese mobile apps, a bunch at a time on the ground, that they have been engaging in activities. So on what basis these 43 mobile apps or totally 250 Chinese mobile apps have been blocked? Saying it is prejudicial to sovereignty and integrity of India, defense of India, security of the state and public order. With immensely popular TikTok and PUBG already blocked, this time it was the turn of likes of Alipay Cashier, Snack Video, Chinese Social, Adore app and Alibaba Workbench to meet the same fate. China not for the first time either, has charged India with using national security as an excuse to target Chinese apps. But China has earlier also, and now also, China is saying that India is using just an excuse of national security to ban the apps. But the irony is, China's crying discrimination is very ironical. Its version of internet is tightly controlled. They themselves have controlled their internet. They don't allow Google, they don't allow Facebook, they don't allow various other apps to be there in their country. How they can charge the others, how they can blame the others for doing that. And heavily censored, and has been so for years. So what are the advantages, disadvantages of banning this app? In the short term, it may be useful for India to use its vast market of internet services as a leverage in its attempt to keep China in check at the border. In the short run, it is good because we are trying to put China the Chinese have been very aggressive in the border, and we are trying to hit them where it hurt them the most, that is the economy part. But this is in the short run. Indian app alternatives, and another advantage is Indian apps will be able to grow. They will find the much needed space to grow, and initial reports indicate as much. But there are few risks, especially given India's global ambitions in technology. Let's see what are the risks. First, this approach runs the risk of triggering unconventional battle between the two countries in the technology realm. So first is in the technology realm. There are chances that there will be a battle between India and China, if not in the larger business space. China being an important player in the technology. So remember, China has got all the important technology in the global supply chain. Will be hard, if not impossible, to sideline. So the first risk is there might be a fight between the two countries on technology and technology global supply chain. Second is there is a risk that moves such as blocking apps would be perceived adversely by global investors. The global investors might also think that investing in India or starting apps in India is a little dangerous, because India might just ban it in the future if their relation is not good with the countries. So it can play this two negative role. While it is true that there must be some pushback against Chinese companies and technology globally, India must stick to a rules-based approach in regulating the internet. That is the conclusion. The fourth important conclusion is for your essay or ethics. What we are going to talk about is journalism, the area. So it's going to be a very, you can say, a general editorial, helpful for building your thoughts on journalism, some things on what is truth, role of social media in against journalism and to spread the truth, and finally diversity. So these are the four images on your screen. Let's see a very important editorial, a beautiful editorial, very nicely written. The global epidemic of alternative truths. So today we have a global epidemic of alternative truths. It means fight between the truth and false. Let's see. Untroubled by factuality and diversity, privilege and power are fashioning public opinion in troubled democracies. Currently, the powerful, the privileged, they are deciding what truth is in troubled democracies. Truth is often regarded as a metaphysical construct, though it has more a pragmatic dimension as a process of accurately recording perception. What is truth? Truth is just a fact. Truth is what happened. Truth is recording accurately recording what people think or what people see and what has happened. It's not a metaphysical thing. It's not something outside this world. And ensuring they become part of an agreed social record. And truth should be a part of the agreed social record. Everybody knows, okay, this is the truth. Like for example, the sun rises in the east. That's the truth. It's a fact. now, and it has to be recorded and then everybody explain. But if someone gives some other you can say conclusion that the sun rises in the west or the north or the south by giving some vague reasons and then it is recorded, it is not a truth. Though people might accept it as a truth because everybody is saying it and some reasons are given, but it is actually false. So this is how truth needs to be seen. It is pragmatic dimension, it is accurately recording perceptions and becomes part of agreed social record after proper scrutinization. But is this truth now currently in this situation happening? The US and the social fractures. Let's see the example of the current US elections. In the United States, a defeated president sulks in his lair, insisting that he really won. Earlier in the year, as the novel coronavirus epidemic began its lethal spread across the United States, the political leadership sought salvation in denial and then in division. So, example of truth. President who has lost is trying to use his strength and power and tell everybody that he has won. Same way with the coronavirus, the president was saying there is nothing called as coronavirus. It was denial and now it is division. So the worst at the least in the early phase of the pandemic were people of the minorities and lower income groups. So who were the worst affected? It was the minorities and lower income groups. But were they able to make the political parties responsible? Not only in US, in any countries. Were they able to make the people in power responsible on how the epidemic spread? Why weren't you able to contain it? Answer is no, because it was all mixed with falsehoods. Like in India also you must have seen, recently Supreme Court had said you can't put a community like the Tablighi Jamaat which was charged with it. It was said by Supreme Court. So again using alternative truths to cover the truth. At just the time the death toll in America crossed a grim milestone, the journalist Talia Levin observed that culture wars had reached a stage at which 1 lakh dead was a matter of political opinion. At a time where 1 lakh around 1 lakh were dying in USA, it should be a matter of concern, but it became a matter of political opinion. There were culture wars. Hannah Arendt, classic 1967 essay, very important essay titled Truth and Politics. Truth and Politics by Hannah Arendt, book written from eyewitness observation, spoke what she thought were undisputable truths. But the response ranged from puzzlement at her motivations to outright mendacity in discrediting the fact she relied on. So she wrote about truth and politics. She wrote by eyewitness observations, but her whole the response which she got was completely with falsehoods and discredited the fact which she relied on. So just remember, important, Hannah Arendt's classic 1967 titled Truth and Politics. So she spoke about true truth, that's factual truth. For her, bore reference to observation by living subjects of constantly changing reality. Factual truths are what we can see, what we record, what has happened. And formal truths, on the contrary, were part of received wisdom. Like 2 and 2 plus 2 is 4. That's received wisdom, that's formal truth. No one has questioned it. So we should actually be questioning the formal truth. How can be 2 and 2 4 and whatever. But we are questioning always focusing on factual truth. But factual truth was always prone to challenge as being no more than opinion. And people say factual truth is just an opinion. So that's how truth is seen. So we are seeing various dimensions of truth. Truth and politics. Arendt conceded had always been on rather bad terms truth and politics have always been on bad terms with each other, and truthfulness was never counted among the political virtues. So it's very shocking to hear truth and politics is not considered to be compatible. James Madison, one of the 7 founding fathers of US Constitution, said that finally they all rest on opinion. Numbers could be guarantee of strength, not of authenticity. Indeed, the whole procedure of Aaron seemed through unsatisfactory, since there was nothing that prevented a majority from being false witnesses. So Arendt has observed that numbers is a guarantee of strength, not of authenticity. Means if many people say something, like the sun rises in the west, if many people start saying it, it becomes strong. That fact becomes strong, but it is not authentic. There is no wisdom in crowds. Like all forms of power, majoritarianism could threaten the truth. War and deception. So another example she gives. In 1971, soon after Pentagon Papers, officially called the Report of the Office of the Secretary of Defense Vietnam Task Force, this was the Vietnam War, which was in the 1971, published in the New York Times, exposed a long trail of official deception on US war in Vietnam. Arendt wrote about the lie in normal circumstances is defeated by reality. However large the tissue of falsehood, even when spun with the help of computers, it would be inadequate to cover the immensity of factuality. So now Arendt is trying to talk about the power of truth. Examples she gives of the US war in Vietnam. The US tried to bring in a lot of deception and falsehood, but it was later out. Truth was out, and it will always be out. A fact could be removed from the world if a sufficient number of people believe in its non-existence, but this would require a process of radical destruction, an experiment that totalitarian regimes had undertaken. A fact can be removed, but it needs radical destruction, and which can be done by dictators. We must have seen people trying to change history, people trying to change science, etc., according to their whims and fancies, mostly by the dictators. Then now comes role of social media. Today's context. So we saw we saw what is truth, what is facts. We saw in the current context about Donald Trump in United States and 1971. Now coming to the current situation, social media. Since 2016, the United Kingdom's Brexit referendum and Trump's election as the US president, social media has come in for intense scrutiny for its ability to create bubbles of political misinformation. So today, social media is charged with political misinformation. The US in this regard is fertile soil, segregated by class and credentials into ghettos of privilege and deprivation of 4 decades of neoliberal economics. US is a very social use of social media and turning the truth into falsehood and falsehood into truth is a very you can say in US you have a very fertile soil for all this. The economist Raghuram Rajan and the philosopher Michael Sandel says, in recent times pointed out how daily lives in the US today are increasingly about sameness, less about diversities of culture and social perception. So we spoke about truth, we spoke about social media, how it can change nowadays, and now everywhere you must have noticed more focus on the sameness rather than speaking about diversity. There can be other ideas, there can be other thoughts, there can be you can say other angle of the truth. India, a social milieu with its own modes of sorting by class, caste and community, affords a new means of campaigning and exercising political power through connectivity. In India also there is a lot of diversity, and social media, journalism, etc. is now being used for political campaigning. Customary deliberative processes have been dispensed with. So in India we have parliamentary system of democracy where diversity is given. We have followed the parliamentary system of democracy because we believe in diversity. We believe various areas or various sections need to be represented. That is why we have the parliamentary system, not the presidential system of democracy. And that is how we must understand. We need to see the other side of the truth. Truth can have many dimensions. You can't bring in false. So we saw what do you mean by truth? What is the current situation happening? Role of social media in putting out the truth and bringing in misinformation. Focus needs to be on diversity, and to bring that, parliament is needed, and finally proper journalism is needed. Parliament sessions conclude without question hour, and consultative meetings across party lines over significant legislative initiatives have been scrapped. Political leaders, beginning with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, speak from highest pedestals but rarely put themselves under scrutiny in media. In his first address to party representatives, Mr. Modi issued several warnings about the media. Print media and TV may seem a good way to protect ideas, he said, but there is a risk of falling victim to their magnetic power. He instructed his colleagues in the party and government to use social media to get the word out, but to stay clear of direct interaction with the traditional news media. So, in this editorial, the writer is saying that Mr. Modi has spoken about speaking to the media and voicing out the issues, etc., but not to come under their magnetic power. So, rather use more social media. Public opinion in democracies is now fashioned with cocoons of privilege and power, untroubled by factualities of diversities in perception. If the US seems, at least for now, to have tapped the countervailing power to neutralize this drift towards world of alternative truth. So US people have now understood what is the true thing, what is the false. Focus is there on the media rather than social media and misinformation. Focus on the truth. Now this challenge is unmet in India. A very beautiful editorial. So we have seen editorials on storm warning, town planning, disaster management. Second editorial on Ayurvedic surgery. Third on apps which were banned, and finally on truth. This was more of a philosophical, important for essays and ethics. Okay, so that's all for the day. Remember, the art of questioning is the source of all knowledge. Thank you and have a nice day.